Hey, Greg, welcome.
Hey Tom, yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the Stamp Show today. You got some exciting news with Darwin, an evolutionary app framework. Can you explain a little bit about what that is and what is an evolutionary app?
Yeah, definitely. So I find the kind of easiest way to go with this is to start with what evolutionary apps are, and then we can talk about Darwin and how it facilitates the process of creating one. So um, evolutionary apps are essentially decentralized web applications that evolve or progress through an incentivized forking mechanism, as well as market-based governance. And so, like, what does that mean, right? So on the incentivized forking part, the general idea is that as a builder that creates an app within the system, you would deploy your app that would become like sort of the base or the initial version, and that kind of like kickstarts this whole kind of evolutionary tree where other developers or other builders at any point in the future can come along and they can fork it. But like that just sounds very similar to the sort of general forking system that you have like within blockchains, for example. So the incentives come in where as a innovator, you can come in and you can fork a project, but you can also mint yourself some tokens as part of that, as a reward for the work that you've done. And so the general idea is that if the community see this as like a genuine improvement of the application, as well as fair dilution, so you've minted yourself a fair amount of tokens, then what essentially will happen is that your version now that you've created as the improvement would become the default, essentially. So any user that goes to what we call the app wrapper, which is part of what enables this system to be fully decentralized. So the app wrapper acts as like this routing mechanism for users so that when they land on the domain, it kind of points them to the current selected version. So that's the kind of incentive for developers, is that you don't need for one, you don't need to create like governance proposals that you see in DAOs, for example. You can permissionlessly come along and you can improve something. The other part of the incentive is that there's no need to start from scratch. So you don't need to build a competing product. You can essentially fork an application that might have already grown network effects. And if you build a genuinely useful version and the community agree upon that, then in some sense you acquire those users in a sense. So that is a big part of, I think, what the incentive is for developers to start forking like within the system. And then on the other side, the market-based governance. So essentially this part of it allows users of the application to essentially ultimately collectively decide on what the current default version is within like a given period, for example. And the general idea is that the sort of mechanism that you use to do this is completely down to the implementation. We'll speak a bit more when I speak about Darwin about what we use for that. But generally, the idea is that it creates this effect that users now collectively decide how an application morphs and grows. And what it does long term, and what we see it doing long term, is that it will likely keep sort of like incentives aligned between developers and users long term. So that's like evolutionary apps conceptually. And Darwin is a framework to facilitate, one, it facilitates the creation of evolutionary apps through the Darwin CLI. So developers can install the CLI. You can deploy it. It's got a very, very similar flow to how, so anyone that's familiar with deploying a perma web app, is a very similar flow to that. We're using Bundler under the hood. So you just kind of give it your like your build folder, and we'll run through maybe a little demo in a little bit to show what that actually looks like. So it helps you to actually create an evolutionary app, and then it also facilitates the process of forking one as well. And then there's a couple of components that happen under the hood, particularly with creating one. So when you create an evolutionary app as like the base or initial version, it also deploys an app wrapper at the same time. And this happens under the hood. And what the app wrapper does is that it has a function within it. And this is part of the Darwin implementation. So we utilize Stamps protocol to essentially look at the evolutionary tree. So the function has a transaction ID that gets essentially deployed with it at the time of that initial version. and it gets put into this graph function where it finds all of the versions, all of the future versions of that evolutionary app. And essentially what it does is that it compares the stamps across all of them. And we implement a layer of Sybil resistance using vouch DAO. So we look at particularly the vouch stamps across those versions. And whichever version has the highest vouch stamps is what it will point the user to, essentially. And so the important part of this is that the app wrapper is a perma-web app. So it's permanent on Arweave. It's fully decentralized and tamper-proof. So it kind of runs that way permanently. So that's essentially the role of Darwin, is that it facilitates and puts the concept of evolutionary apps into practice. So I hope that answers the question.
Very cool. Yeah, that was a great answer. Let me try to run that back to you and see if I've got like kind of a high level gist. So
Sure.
as a developer, if I have an idea for an app, I can like work on this app and use the Darwin app framework to kind of kickstart kind of an evolutionary app process, right? So my app now is no longer centralized, it's decentralized. So we put it on the permaweb, but then I use this framework to make it evolutionary, which means that, you know, as basically I open it up for other developers to continue to contribute without me having to decide whether their idea is good or not. And other developers can kind of take that app and make it their own through this process. And then
Yes.
to kind of round trip that, the actual users of the evolutionary app actually choose which version is kind of the most used or the most popular by using stamps to kind of drive that. So you could envision, you know, like a simple blog post app, right? And everybody wants to add these features, and then there may be some users that want features that are more focused on maybe technical papers, and you have that
Right.
blog post app evolve into a technical paper research paper app. And then there may be
Yeah.
others that want it to be more of a gallery kind of style post where they're posting their
Right.
art. So you can really have several different versions from the kind of the root kernel of the app. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's exactly it. It allows. I mean, there's a. I think we've spoken about the kind of core part of it, but I think there's a few like other issues that it provides quite a nice solution to, which is one that you touched on first, which is the burden of maintenance, right? And I think this is what makes it particularly a really good tool for people that are building, you know, whether it's open source, side projects, like weekend projects, anything that, you know, you might even find useful in your day to day that you've just built for yourself, but you would love to share with people, right? You know, there was a tweet I'd seen like about a month or so ago, a very prolific builder on Web2 called Rauno. And he's well known for building these really small experiments. And he built this kind of bookmarking application. And he'd had this problem that he tweeted about where, you know, he'd said, I've built this app that I use every day and it's genuinely useful to me and I would love to share it with people. But one core issue is that like I don't want there to be this kind of burden of maintenance, because people are gonna, you know, they're gonna file issues and they're gonna expect, you know, me to like build out this feature and like this feature. But I'm kind of happy with the way it is. But also I don't want to charge for it, but it isn't free at the point at which I kind of, and of course, like what he was really, I think, nodding to was the kind of the centralized infrastructure of Web 2, where you have these services that are centralized on you as a developer, right? And now, you know, when you surpass like a certain tier, you have to now pay these fees and these fees. But in this system, of course, and leveraging Arweave, you deploy once, right? And it's available forever. And so in this system, it takes it further to the point where you don't even need to have the burden of maintenance. You can just deploy it, and you essentially can allow the community now to take it forward through the evolutionary app. So, another developer might come along in like a year's time and say, okay, this is a pretty cool idea, and I really like the UI, but I've got this idea for it, so I'm going to fork it. And the really cool thing and the incentive here, I think, for those kind of projects is that as the initial creator, you'll still see some upside, right? Because the idea is that as you fork not just the data, but also the tokens in the system. So that initial creator will still be receiving value for many, many versions to come, which I think it makes it a really perfect framework for those kind of applications where you might have a side project or something open source.
Very cool. Yeah, it kind of just really creates a clear kind of set of rules of how to continue to contribute and build applications on both the developer side and the user side without having some sort of central manager, for lack of a better term, kind of making those decisions, right? It's just kind of baked into the code. That's really, really cool. I've already got like 5 apps that I'm ready to convert to evolutionary apps because
Awesome.
it is, really a challenge to keep those up to date. And that sounds exciting.
Yeah, very cool and very excited. To hear that you got some applications that you want to test out. If you need any assistance and want to chat about them at any point, I'm completely up for that. So yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, so you've got the framework, and the framework kind of creates the tool, but then you have in Darwin itself a way for contributors to kind of stamp or kind of determine which versions are the ones that they're digging, right, or liking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And the way I look at this, kind of from more of like a macro or philosophical perspective, is that it's a system that encourages you as a user to utilize your voice in the system, right? Like on Arweave, every user in the system is sovereign, and everyone has a voice that can't be taken away from them, right? And I think just thinking about wider crypto, I think we've come to realize, particularly in the last cycle, that there was this kind of issue popping up of like there was lots and lots of solutions and lots of dApps and lots of things being built, but I think it was very limited in terms of like what you could do with your sort of your decentralized identity, essentially, right? Like what you can do with your wallet address, and I think people just want something to be able to do with this that is meaningful and useful to them. And I think in this system, what better way to be able to utilize that than to be able to have a voice in an app that you have a preference for, and by doing that you directly contribute towards its prominence in the system. So you could imagine if Twitter was in the system, right? Well, actually, I like to give the example because I've been speaking about this a lot to friends and family, and trying to make the idea a lot more universal. And so I like to give the example of Instagram because a lot of my friends and family use Instagram. And I remember the very sort of early version of Instagram where you just had like super simple UI. It was like all chronological, and it was more or less like you were just finding out what your friends were up to. And you had this chronological timeline, and it was quite nice for creators as well because you could kind of see things as they were coming through. But then of course over time, that application is obviously morphed into something completely different. And of course, Web 2 is much more of a competitive landscape. So I think there's almost an incentive for that application to morph into something that now becomes a competitor to like TikTok, for example, and Twitter and YouTube and all of them. And so the way I like to frame it to people is like, well, what if you could go back? So this is the first part, is like, as a user in the system, you're not forced to update to any version. So even though you have this decentralized app wrapper that points users to the most stamped version in Darwin, there's actually so on the wrapper itself, so the wrapper actually has, and we can take a look at this in a bit, it just has a loader, and that loader is there whilst it's kind of configuring this function to find out the most stamped version. But if you hit escape before that's up, so it's a couple of seconds, so if you hit escape, you actually get taken to the App Explorer, which we'll also look at, which shows you all of the app versions, so that you can actually go and have a look at the app versions yourself. Or if you have a preference, you can be directed there and you can go and use your preferred app. Or, you know, if it's under an RNS name, then you can just do that without even going to the app wrapper. But the idea is that, like, no user is forced to update in the system. You know, in Web 2, in the example of Instagram, for example, right? Like, there's no way we can get back to that, because that's completely under the control of Instagram. You know, they update their versions kind of like under the hood, and you know, every now and then they'll sort of release terms of service and whatnot. But as users, we just kind of get dragged along for the ride. But in this system, you can use whatever version you want. It doesn't have to be the most used version. And I think the really interesting part about this is that it gives the rise to the possibility of like niches being created. So you know, I mean, you touched on this as well, which is a really great point, that like developers can build all kinds of different like improvements, and it's almost like it's literally like a tree. Like, you can have these different branches that go in different directions, and you might actually get, you know, communities forming at, you know, at those places. And I think what the opportunity there becomes for developers is to build versions that start to reconcile those different branches and bring them into like, and sort of almost create this community cohesion effect that you know, you often lack within sort of general forks in the blockchain space. So yeah, so I mean, that's essentially sort of the core part of the user participation, as well as the fact that you get to utilize you know, your sort of voice in the system to be able to stamp and say, okay, you know, I prefer this version, so I'm putting like my kind of almost like a vote, but of course, like, not it's not a token vote. It's like, you know, token free voting, I think is the core thing here.
Very, very cool. Yeah. So you've got like this, almost like this family tree, if you will, of your application, of kind of where it's
Yeah,
gone. And as you explained that, kind of my experience in history with application development's always been kind of this version 1, version 2, version 3 flow, where version 1 is kind of the idea and the core, and then version 2 is kind of like you add a zillion features, and then version
right.
3 is kind of like you trim the fat, so to speak. You trim out the features no one's using and keep the features that everybody's using. um, I think that this could break that mold, so to speak, because you can have, you know, like you said, multiple. You start with the kernel. You create a bunch of apps with a bunch of different features. You converge them, but they could converge into many different ways. So,
Yeah,
so like your Instagram analogy, it could be Instagram slash TikTok,
exactly.
Instagram slash, you know, whatever else, threads, I guess. But as a user, you could use the core one, or you could use one of the branches, or you could use, you know, you could choose which one works for you, which I think is really pretty empowering.
Yeah, definitely agree. Yeah.
Cool. Well, do you have a little demo to show? Maybe show the Darwin application.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, what I can run through, I actually have like a basic demo app, and we can maybe do a quick run through of what the flow looks like to, you know, as a developer, to actually create one, to go and then see it on the Explorer. And then just imagine that we're like another dev that comes along and wants to fork it, and then we can fork it and then have a look at it in the evolutionary tree. So yeah, I'd be happy to actually run through that. So I'll just share my screen here. Right. Cool. Right. Yeah, let me know if this is coming through okay.
Yep, we got it.
Okay. Perfect. So yeah, we've got this just really super bare bones demo app. You can see it says, well, like, welcome to the Perm web. So it's kind of like maybe like a hello world introduction to someone that's to like a builder that's not familiar with Arweave. So just, it's super like pseudo, but just for the demo, I'm going to keep it really simple. So we can just imagine this is like an app with maybe a couple of features. But as a developer, so you can see all the code, right? Just want to make sure we've got the right screen.
Yep.
Perfect. So yeah, this is just the code, like really, really simple. We just have welcome to the Perm web there. And so as a developer now, if I want to deploy this, the first thing I want to do, of course, is install the CLI command. So I can run npm install -g, and it's, I think I spelled that wrong, Darwin apps. I've already done this, so I'm not going to run it, but you can run that and it should install it. You can double check by running Darwin-v, and you should see the version number, so we're all good to go. So what you want to do is you want to run Darwin create, and then you want to specify what type of evolutionary app you want to create. So you can create like the base, and this will, of course, create your initial version along with a wrapper. Or if you want to fork a version, you can run Darwin create fork. But in this case, we just want to run create a base version. And then we want to give it our deploy folder, which in this case is out. So I will run Darwin create base out. And also, just as a additional piece of information, you can also actually run a help command, which will show you all of the command line flags that you can add. But just for this, the sake of this, I'm just going to allow this thing to prompt. So there's a few required arguments, so that if you sort of omit them in the arguments part, you'll be prompted, as you can see here. So we'll just quickly run through this flow, and I'm just going to record something really simple like hello, like hello world app. And we can add a group ID. So I'm just going to say hello Perm web 1. Then we can add some topics. So this is good for, of course, for discoverability. So as a builder, it might be good to kind of add in things here, like the type of app. Maybe if it's a social app, like a music app or something. It could be even helpful to include things like the tooling you use, like maybe framework, just to give people more of an idea of like what they can expect if they fork this thing. But of course, like you can kind of put what you want here. So hello world, we'll just leave it at that. And then you can set the number of tokens that you wish to mint. So I'm just going to put 1,000. Path to release notes as well. So these release notes are, of course, to sort of describe what your app does. For forks, you will describe what the improvements are to the system, what changes have been made. So I can add that. I can choose my bundler node because we're running bundler under the hood. And then we can choose the index file for the manifest. So I'm happy with index.html. We can provide a logo, which I don't think I have. So we're just going to omit that. And we don't have a transaction ID for our source code. So what this is doing right now, as you can see here, it's just creating a folder, is that it's now uploading our source code, which is a very important part of the system, right? So when someone comes to fork the app, they will be able to actually download the source code, to which they'll be able to then, of course, improve it and add their improvements. So that's what this step is. And just so people know, like any files that you don't want to be submitted to the Arweave network, just make sure they're in a git ignore file. It will make sure to omit anything that's in the git ignore, so you don't have to worry about that. So you can see it's uploading the source code now, and we just give that a second. So we can see there we've got the transaction ID, which is great. Yes, we'll remove those generated files, and we actually do have a manifest. I'm just going to do this just to speed things up a little bit. So yeah, that's great. And you can see we just kind of get like a little confirmation thing here to confirm everything that we put in. So I'm quite happy with that. And we're going to deploy the app. So you can see it's deployed really quickly there with bundler. And now we're just deploying the app wrapper under the hood. So that's currently what's happening. So we'll give that a second, and we can see now we can visit the app wrapper. Again, just as a note, currently the app wrapper it's taking like a couple of minutes to be functional. So before we take a look at that, we can go now into the App Explorer and we can actually take a look. So you can see now, super quick. So that's just the amazing blazingly fast bundler working. And so we can take a look at that now. So we can firstly have a look at the fork tree. So you can see that we've got the first version here. We can click on it to get some more information if we want. So again, if I'm a developer that's curious about seeing like the entire fork tree, I can look at this view, or you also have like a list view that's kind of just a bit more well suited to your average user. So I can jump into this now. You can see here that we've got the heading, we've got the description of the app, we've got who uploaded it, when they uploaded it. So we can actually visit the app itself. So we can click on that and we get taken to it.
Nice.
Which is cool. Then we've got some like release notes here, which we will add a renderer for. So that's a up and coming feature.
Nice.
And then we can download the source. So we can download the source code. So it's not found yet, but we should get that shortly. And then also when we want to fork, we can copy the version ID as well, which we will do in a moment. So that's currently what the flow kind of looks like if you're, if you're deploying an app and then you want to go and view it in the Explorer, it's a fairly straightforward process in that sense. But let's look at what it looks like to fork one, right? So
okay.
Again, for the sake of time, really, I've got some code that I'm just gonna add in here. So in any typical case, I would like download the source code, right? And I'd like download it onto my machine. I would then obviously add the improvements to my code editor, and then I would deploy like the new version. But in here, we're just gonna add the code in. And what this code is essentially is, so it's kind of like a few cards that link to different places on Arweave. So you've got a link to the to RWiki. You've got a link to the cookbook, you've got a link to VouchDAO, you've got a link to set up a wallet with RConnect. So we can imagine this as being like the kind of improvement of this, right? So what we want to do now that we've created our improvement is we want to fork it. So it's a similar thing to what we did last time. So we run Darwin create, fork this time instead of base. And we want to give it, actually, firstly, we'd like to build this, otherwise it will deploy the old version. So we'll give that a second to build. And I think we should...
Very cool. This is all very cool.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, I think we're good. So we can run Darwin create fork out, and then we'll just do that. I'm gonna upload it with a different wallet this time, just so we can actually see something. So let's provide a title. So I'm just gonna say hello fork, hello world app fork. And then we can provide the transaction ID for the app we're remixing, right? So this is where we want to go back to Darwin, and we can copy the version ID, which is the transaction ID of this version, take it back into here, and we can just hit enter. We can set our tokens in the system. I'm just going to set, actually, I'm going to just to sort of see something different, I'm going to put 1,500 this time. And again, we can just add the same release notes and all these parts, leave your source code, and I will just link as well to the same source code, which I think I'll be able to find somewhere here. Or actually, it's okay. We'll just deploy it again, no problem. So we're uploading the source code again. It's yes. In this case, the answer is no. But now we're deploying a manifest because we don't have one. So this will run. This will create a manifest for us and deploy that to Arweave. And then once we're all happy with everything and checked over, we can then confirm that. And we should have our fork. Okay, cool. So we can go back now to here. And if we take a look at the fork tree again, now we can see we've got our fork. So you can see the initial one, hello, and then we can see hello fork. And you can see we've got the parent fork ID as well that's showing up, which is quite nice. And so, so yeah, this is the general flow. And I think another nice or important part of this, actually, just to demonstrate what this looks like in terms of the tokens in the system. We've actually got, so I'm going to just copy the version IDs and put this into Walk Tools. So these applications, so every app version is deployed as an atomic asset. So essentially it has a contract embedded in it, which are tradable. So we can actually just take a look at this here, and we should hopefully be able to read the contract state, and which we can see, okay, we've got the initial creator with 1,000 tokens in the system. And then we can have a look at the fork version, and we can take that version ID and put it into the Walk Tools. And what we should see is that now you have the initial creator still has their tokens in the system maintained at the same amount. And now you have the person that's innovated, they've now added their tokens on top of that. And so the value is proportionate. And so this is essentially how the implementation works right now. So I thought
very cool.
Yeah, so that could be particularly useful for people just to see what it actually looks like in terms of minting tokens in the system. And another nice feature just from the user part of this, which I think could be quite nice, is that you're able to also like discuss and so like for example, I'm gonna connect my wallet here. I think I should give it a second. I think it should connect. May need to give it a refresh, actually. There we go. And we'll just give it a second. We should be connected. Okay, cool. And so so now as a user, I can basically comment on this, and I can say like, something like, yo, this is super cool. And I can just hit comment. That we submitted a comment, and now it shows up. So we have this commenting feature to allow people to provide feedback, maybe even share future ideas, future versions, like opportunities, things like that. But yeah, this is all part, I think, of making this really something that like users want to engage in and become interested in that. So the last part of this that I just want to touch on is the app wrapper part of it. So we can go back to this right now, and we can have a look at this Hello app. So we can see our two versions. So at this point, we can see Visit App. So Visit App, we're actually talking about visiting the app wrapper, because when we go into each version, then we can visit the version, right? But if we actually are in the kind of this list view, and perhaps we can make this a bit better with maybe saying versions down here, but we can take a look at this. We can visit apps. So you can see we've got this kind of infinite loader, and the function is running under the hood to find the version. And there we go. It's calculated that. So essentially the way it runs is that if there's like no stamps in the system, it just takes, it uses the order of provenance. So it will always default to the first version if there are like no stamps at all. But of course, if let's say we stamp the fork, and now this is actually the first time I'm trying this. So, we're going to see how this works, but I'm going to attempt to stamp this here and see if we can get it to update. Might need to refresh that. Okay. It seems to have worked.
It was stamped.
Okay. Yeah, so we stamped it. Cool. And now let's see if it worked. Again, haven't tried this yet. Okay, so we still got the same version right now. May need to maybe give it a second to update, or double check the function.
Cool. So basically, it's going to look up that and see which one's the most stamped and load that one.
Yeah. So that's essentially what the function will do. I think maybe the wallet I had wasn't vouched because as I mentioned before, it's just looking at the vouch stamps. But I mean, that's the general idea. I won't like mess around with it too much. But yeah, so that's the general flow, and I hope that I hope that was useful and it shows developers like what the general flow using Darwin looks like, and also from a user perspective, what it looks like to use the Explorer. There's a couple of other features that we didn't dive into, but you've also got search, so you can search you can search by wrapper, so you can search for a wrapper's name, and the wrapper just takes the base version's name, so it's just a bit easier to find them. But if you have a specific version name, you can find that. The same with transaction ID, so you can search by these things as well. So yeah, I mean, there's going to be more features coming, you can search by topics soon, and a whole bunch of other things. But yeah, that's the general flow, and I hope that demo was useful. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Very awesome. Yeah, that was great, Greg. I know you've spent a lot of time getting this working, and it looks awesome. So
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Where can developers go to learn more about Darwin?
Yeah, so for developers, I would say the best place to start right now is to go to tutorial_darwin.arweave.dev. And so that's just a basic developer guide on how to get set up with the CLI, to install and run the commands. But yes, we will have also some more content coming as far as videos to actually demonstrate, just similar to that demo that we showed you there, where we can actually sort of run through things visually, because I personally as a developer find that helps me a lot, to kind of see somebody run through this thing in their IDE and deploy stuff. So we've also got some of that stuff coming too. But yeah, I would say right now tutorial_darwin.arweave.dev is the best place to go as a developer. And I think there should be some links in there to the npm package and also the repository if you want to check out that and file any issues if you're having issues with the CLI. Yeah, that's the best place.
Great. I'll post that, as well as I think on the PermaWeb Discord we have a channel set up for Darwin now, so
yes,
I'll post that as well.
Yeah, great.
Probably be the best. That would that be the best place to ask questions if developers have questions, or are there
absolutely
other places? Okay.
Yeah, I would say Discord would be the best place. Developers, even people that are non-technical, that are just interested in the idea and want to learn more about it. Yeah, definitely pop a question in the Discord, and
cool.
We'll definitely get back to you.
Awesome. And are you on Twitter? What's your Twitter handle, in case people want to follow you on that?
Sure. More? Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Greg Ogun, so Greg Ogun. So yeah, you can find me there. So I'll be posting about things Darwin, also working on various other things like the comment spec, as you know, Tom, and also some renderer stuff as well. So yeah, so I mean, you can find me there posting about that stuff.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. I know you got the music renderer out there, and I know that there's just a huge demand for other renderers. So looking forward to that, and also great work on the comment spec. I've seen other apps already start using that spec. So like Rareweave, and I know some others are starting to use it. So that's pretty awesome as well. Yeah, this is all great. Any other final words or things to shout out?
I mean, nothing other than just to say a huge thank you to everyone in the ecosystem, including yourself and everyone at Forward Research that helped and supported me through this, whether it was advice, feedback, just general support. And also those community members that spent a lot of time in the research and development phase of the framework for evolving Arweave, which was actually a core idea that inspired Evolutionary Apps. So just huge appreciation to everyone in the community that was a part of all of that. And a huge thank you to you, Tom, for having me on. I'm a huge fan of the Stamp Show, so I feel really honored to be on it. It's really awesome.
Yeah, man, I'm a huge fan of yours. So this has been a privilege and a pleasure, and a lot of fun. So looking forward to having you on again with new updates come out or new stuff to show. So thanks again, and enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks so much.